Sometimes we don't want code to just do something over and over and over and over again until a certain condition is met. Sometimes we want to write code that has so many attempts and then stops. For example, you might have 5 attempts at putting your PIN number in and then it throws you out. So we use for that a for next statement. A for next statement gives you a counter and gives you so many attempts. So for example, I've gone to the sheet called for next, and I'd then from my code file like to copy and paste a sub-procedure called application. I'll highlight application to end sub, copy that, and I'll put it into my Visual Basic Editor. Now the whole idea with this sub-procedure called application is I'm declaring 3 variables. I'm declaring my username as a string, which is text, my password as a string, which is text, and my counter as a byte, which is a number between 0 and 255. I'm then giving the user 3 attempts to enter either Tom, Dick or Harry. So for the counter, it's set to 1 to 3. They get 3 attempts. After we've set the counter, it says my username is an input box, and I ask them to enter their username. Now if the username is nothing and the count is less than 3, so it's one of their 3 attempts, then the message box comes up and says you haven't entered a username, and we'll ask them to, and it'll set the counter to 2, go back around and ask them again. But if they have entered a username, then it'll ask them, is it Tom, is it Dick, or is it Harry? If it's Tom, Dick or Harry, then it'll actually put it into the cell B3 in U case or uppercase. If they haven't entered Tom, Dick or Harry, then it's an invalid username and it will exit the sub procedure, hence the statement here, exit sub. Having got their username sorted, it will then move on to the password if they've entered a username that's valid. The password, I'm giving them 2 attempts, so my counter is reset for 1 to 2. And I'll ask them to enter their password. If their password again has not been entered and the counter is again less than 2, so it's one of their 2 attempts, then it'll say you haven't entered a password. But if they have entered a password and it's not Cathi, then it'll say invalid password and exit the sub-procedure, the end. But if they have entered the password Cathi, then in the cell B4 it'll say correct and it'll exit the for next and stop countering. So let's give this a go. I'll bring up my chapter 3 and my for next sheet, and I'm just going to press F8. As I press F8, my counter to begin with is set to 1. As I press F8, it asks me for my username. So if I do nothing and go OK, basically my username is equal to nothing and my counter is less than 3, so it should say to me, you've not entered a username. And it does. I go OK, it ends the if, I press F8, next counter, so now my counter is at 2, and this is my second attempt to get it right. Again it asks me for my username, and this time I'll enter Tom. Actually I'll enter Harry, and OK. Now my counter is at 2 and my username is Harry, so if I press F8 it should drop down to here. It's now going to, in uppercase and in the cell B3, it'll put my username, which is Harry. It'll exit the for next, so it doesn't go to the 3rd counter, and now it's my attempt to put in the correct password, and I get 2 attempts. If I press F8 it will ask me for my password. If I fail to put my password in and just go OK and press F8, it says you have not entered a password. If I click OK, I end the if, my counter goes to next my counter, so now my counter is at 2. This is my second attempt. If I press F8, it will ask me to put a password in, so I'll enter Cathi. If I click OK, it should now, with F8, take me down to here, where my password, here is Cathi. It'll go to B4, it'll enter the value correct, it'll exit the for, and then exit the sub. So that is an example of 2 for next statements, one giving you 3 attempts and one giving you 2 attempts, also mixed with an if statement, which is extremely common to code. There are instances also inclusive in that sub-procedures of exit for and exit sub.